Hey, this is Dr. Steve Miller, aka the Subpar Psychologist, and this is the first episode. I want to talk broadly about mental health. Hey, imagine that. A psychologist wanting to talk about mental health? Big reveal. Anyways, I, I do want to start by asking, do you know why mental health actually matters in your life? Maybe someone told you could benefit from therapy, like a spouse or a friend. Essentially, do you even therapy, bro? Well, in this episode, I just want to have a real conversation about why mental health is important, why it deserves your time and attention, and hopefully remove some stigma that may exist. I'll also share my perspective as a professional psychologist and discuss how to choose a mental health professional, or at least what I think might be helpful to find the right fit for what you need. So, this would hopefully be that episode where at the end of it you think, well, I didn't projectile vomit or fall asleep. So, let's see where this goes. Before we begin, a little disclaimer. I am a licensed psychologist and I do currently work with people, but this podcast ain't therapy, nor should it be a substitute for one-on-one therapy with a trained professional who can actually talk with you, get to know you, and address what you're struggling with. It's also not a substitute for medical advice. This is a place where I can talk about mental health, share some musings, and maybe have a laugh. Also, if you're in crisis or having thoughts of suicide, call, chat, or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. I used to work for a crisis line, and where I was at was filled with people who do genuinely care whether you live or die. I'll talk more about that in another episode, but for now, this is my PSA. Let's get to it. Why is mental health important? So originally, I had this lovely history of mental health planned. I was going to take you on this incredible journey back to the early 1900s, psychology's before time, and the long, long ago, and then heroically bring us all the way back to the present to explain how mental health became recognized as just as important as physical health. But then I reread it, and I got bored, like really bored, and I had to scrap it. So the short version is this. Over the past century, psychology has produced a ton of high-quality research that has consistently withstood scientific scrutiny and has established itself as a legitimate science, one that demonstrates mental health should be taken just as seriously as physical health. It's two sides of the same coin, really. For those of you who are still skeptical of mental health, I hear you, and I've been there, and I've definitely spoken to a few people who think my profession is complete bullshit. But remember that idea I mentioned a second ago about mental health and physical health being two sides of the same coin? That's because one can influence the other. In my clinical experience, gastrointestinal issues or GI issues can show up with anxiety or depression or make GI issues worse. Physicians and dietitians know this too. Another clear mind-body connection we see is pain. People who are depressed typically feel more pain and have a harder time coping with it. There are even psychological conditions so strong they can cause what we call functional neurological symptoms, meaning there's some aspect of the brain that's not functioning the way we'd expect, and yet there's no damage to the brain, which can show up as seizures, partial paralysis, speech difficulties, and even blindness. I've had people go to the hospital thinking they were having a heart attack because they experienced tightness or pain in the chest, sweating, nausea, to then find out it was a panic attack. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I'm telling you this to demonstrate just how deeply the mind and body are connected. It sounds kind of crazy, but this stuff is real. It's physical and it deserves to be taken seriously. Nay, needs to be taken seriously. So, if you're still with me at this point, maybe you buy into the whole mind-body connection thing, but you're still thinking, that's cool and all. Still not calling a therapist. Fair enough. Mark, Joe, Bob, Joe, Henry, Bob. That's reluctance makes a lot of sense. because there are some real barriers that get in the way of people seeking help. These are the few I've seen over the years. And no, this is definitely not a complete list. But if you are one of those individuals who has reservations about therapy, maybe some of these will sound familiar. So, barrier one, disclosure and confidentiality fears. I've had people who were terrified that if anything they shared were to get out, it could harm their reputation, relationships, or job. And yeah, that fear makes sense. But here's the truth. Confidentiality is a cornerstone of the therapeutic relationship. It means you can pretty much share anything, and it stays between you and your therapist. There are limits, though, and they're actually pretty specific. A mental health professional is generally required to break confidentiality primarily if someone is in imminent danger to themselves or someone else, or if there's suspected abuse to a child, an elder, or a dependent adult. Each state has its own laws about what has to be reported, so it's absolutely okay to ask your therapist about confidentiality up front, along with any other questions you have. In fact, a good therapist should explain those limits to you before your first session even starts. Barrier two, self-stigma, the I shouldn't need help voice that is in the mind. I've noticed that I tend to hear this more often from men, and often it's kind of shaped by ideas like, self-reliance, stoicism, handling your own problems, the sense that going to therapy somehow violates an unspoken man code. Maybe some of that is historical carryover from a time when mental health treatment was mostly associated with severe mental illness and institutionalization. Not sure. Or maybe it simply follows the old "you never ask for directions" rule. Either way, being a dude is confusing. I don't have it all figured out. I will have more to say about it in a later episode or five. I've got thoughts, but this goes well beyond men. A lot of people grow up believing that asking for help is weakness, that they should just try harder, push through it, or that everything they're struggling with is all in their heads. Or they grew up with, or have lived with, people who are knowingly or unknowingly invalidating. People might hear, "Stop worrying about it. You can't think like that. Think positive. Crying is for babies." I'm almost thinking like a mom voice. "Oh, honey, you don't really feel that way." Some of those things heard may have come from someone who really cared about you, but maybe were not in a place to hold space for all you were going through. Some people feel they are betraying their family or culture even by seeking therapy. Others may avoid it due to fear. To me, asking for help is one of the strongest things you can do, and for many, it's also one of the hardest. Some people I've met resisted talking to a therapist or maybe anyone that could help them for years. For some of them, by the time they came in, it was close or had already cost them a friendship, their job, their marriage or relationship, or deeply strained their family. I've had a few clients who wondered if I saw them as weak after they explained what they were going through. I'll tell you what I've told them. It isn't weakness, it's bravery. Cliche, but bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing something hard despite the fear, despite the guilt, despite how uncomfortable it feels. So earlier, I mentioned that I used to work for a crisis line. I worked specifically with the Veterans Crisis Line. It was tough work, but incredibly meaningful. And honestly, as much as I worried about the people who called, I worried I worried even more about the ones who didn't. I uh, I remember several of those callers described feeling ashamed and weak for needing to reach out. They explained it like as if trauma and depression, anxiety, heartbreak, death, uncertainty, and other afflictions of life were something you should have figured out completely on your own. As if simply being alive meant you should have all the answers to your life. Man, people can be unbelievably hard on themselves. The thoughts people have when looking in the mirror are incredibly brutal. That's why I say it's bravery when someone comes to therapy, because I can only imagine the internal battle they had to fight just to walk through the damn door. The last barrier that I'll mention is public stigma, the stereotypes and assumptions people have about mental health and therapy. I'd, I'd heard this before, that mental health professionals were pejoratively called shrinks, which, as I understand it, is short for head shrinkers. That doesn't exactly help with credibility or make anyone think, yeah, I'll definitely want to go see one of those and tell them my problems. Oh, I, I even had someone ask me, completely serious, if I could read minds. Blew me away. It's funny in hindsight, but it stuck with me because therapy can get treated like something mysterious or magical instead of the evidence-based profession it actually is. All right, then there's family. I've talked to teens and adults whose parents did not believe in therapy or that their struggles were even real. Some families or cultures want to keep struggles private. Someone explained to me one time that if their family admits it's a problem, then it's a problem. That logic is like families who want to keep up appearances, like a dollhouse. Everything looks beautiful and perfect on the outside, but on the inside, the walls are thin, rooms are hollow, and everyone has to act like nothing is broken. So after all that, what do therapists and psychologists, social workers actually offer? I feel like I need to explain briefly what some of these titles mean before, you going out and finding one. Um, Although I'm going to give a brief explanation of these professionals, it is important to remember that good therapy can come from any of them. Okay? Any of them. So, a therapist is an umbrella term for any licensed mental health professional who provides psychotherapy. That can include psychologists, social workers, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists. Basically, if you've got problems, we get a wide variety of people who will tell you you've got problems and then work with you to help with those problems. Yeah. In the US, psychologists typically have doctoral level training. It's like a PhD or a Psy.D, and are trained in therapy, assessment, diagnosis, and research. They also have specialized training in psychological testing. My degree is a Psy.D. Basically, it means I spent a lot of extra years in school because I apparently didn't value sleep or financial stability. Oh, okay. This is good to know. That a psychiatrist, because I've had people ask me how they compare to a psychologist, is a medical doctor with specialized training in prescribing medications for mental health concerns. But some I've met also provide bits of therapy when needed. Licensed clinical social workers are master's level clinicians who provide therapy and are trained to focus on practical support and how a person functions within their environment and relationships. Licensed professional counselors and marriage and family therapists are also master's level clinicians who provide therapy and will often focus on things like relationships, trauma, or particular treatment approaches. So the main takeaway is this: all of these professionals can provide therapy. The differences are mostly in training, background, and areas of emphasis. Okay, so how to find a good therapist? There's three things I want to note. First, know what you're looking for, have some idea about it. It helps to start by thinking about what you actually need. It might be most basic, but it, ask yourself a few basic questions. What have you been noticing about yourself lately? Have people close to you mentioned any concerns? Think about specific symptoms or changes, things like low mood, increased worry, trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, low energy, poor concentration. Other stuff might become apparent, like flashbacks or intrusive recalls of traumatic memories or repetitive behaviors. And probably the biggest question of all, are these things starting to interfere with your work, your relationships, or your day-to-day life? Being clear on this helps you figure out what kind of support might be most useful And if you're thinking, I don't really know what's wrong, I just know that something feels off, that's completely okay. Even if you can't quite explain it yet, you can still reach out. A therapist can help you make sense of what you're experiencing. Second, goodness of fit. Once you've found someone you're considering, remember, your first session is essentially the therapist's job interview, because it is. You don't need to have everything figured out right away, but by the end of that first session, you should have at least some sense that this is a person you could eventually open up to. Ask yourself a few key questions. Do you feel comfortable with them? Whether you're sitting in the same room or talking over video. How is their demeanor and tone? Do they seem warm, attentive, genuinely interested in what you're saying? Most importantly, are they listening? Does it feel like there's someone who will actually get you? You can also think about whether certain things matter to you, like their education, training, or how they approach treatment. If you're curious, it's completely okay to ask something like, how do you help people? Or what's your approach to therapy? And if you know you're looking for a specific type of treatment, like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, or ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. I know there's a lot of acronyms in mental health, but ask about their experience with these approaches. Don't forget about personal comfort either. Would you feel more comfortable working with a man or a woman? Does it matter to you that your therapist shares aspects of your background, culture, or identity? All of these preferences are valid. Not every therapist will be the right one for you, and that says nothing about whether your problems are too big or too complicated. Sometimes it just isn't the right fit. And if a therapist feels they don't have the specific training or expertise to best help you with what you're dealing with, a good one will tell you that honestly and point you towards someone who does. Lastly, advocate for yourself. Advocate for yourself. You are not stuck with the first therapist you meet. It's okay to shop around a little bit. Check out their profile or website first. Get a sense of who they are and how they work before you even walk through the door. Here's the thing, and this is probably the most important thing I'll say in this section. The relationship you have with your therapist, what's known as the therapeutic alliance, is one of the most consistent predictors of successful treatment. Once you find a therapist you like and have a good working alliance, you can talk to them when something doesn't feel right or when you want to focus on a specific topic or issue. Don't ghost them. There are people too. Telling your therapist what isn't working, if that is ever the case, can be some of the most important work you do in therapy. Therapy works best when you feel safe, understood, and respected. So take time to find someone who gives you that. You deserve that. That's going to do it for this episode of the Subpar Psychologist podcast. Thanks for sticking around. And if you made it this far without projectile vomiting or falling asleep, yeah, that's a win. Next episode, we're going to dig into depression. So that's something we've ever wondered about. Come back and we'll figure it out together. I'm Dr. Steve Miller, and be good to yourself. You're the only you have, the only you the world has. And that's not nothing.